the line between disinformation and misinformation is not always an easy one to find. And the reality is the greatest way to impact it, in my experience, is not to let it sit. So in other words, find your trusted interlocutors that are capable of saying, this is not acceptable, this is in fact the truth, here's the information. And I think the community of survivors is one example, but there's a whole series, employers, trusted faith leaders, variety of health workers, and so on can be part of that. In addition, obviously, you want to work with the private sector and those who are spreading information generally to see that they can bring things down that are in fact lies or false information that's being put forward as a way to minimize it. But having a source, a national source, an international source, other trusted sources, and really guiding everybody towards that information is one of the most effective ways to deal with a situation like that.
Great.
Very much agree with that. So, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I'd just add to it maybe by saying that I think one of the things we want to do is work with telecommunication companies to actually ensure that everybody has access to the kind of communications that we're interested in providing, because that's going to be critical for dealing with, obviously the explosion of the disease. And then another issue, I suppose, is just through that, if you have a trusted source, I believe in the idea that we shouldn't be trying to control communication, but rather flood the zone, in a sense, with a trusted source that then is influential community leaders as well as health workers, as Brad noted, and others on these issues, in order to try to amplify the message that's coming through. And I think Tim's absolutely right. I certainly seen the value of communicating constantly on these issues so as to continue to deal with, sort of the vacuum that can be created in this circumstance. But then also with the comments made about the fact that for all of the disinformation that will be put out, it's going to be important to actually have a response to those questions and to those concerns, as Stephen said. And I understand from staff that actually there are also intelligence sources identifying multiple foreign disinformation campaigns and so on. But it's all a part of a larger piece, which is to say that every time there is something that comes out that is in fact false information that is starting to actually hamper our ability to address the pandemic, then we need to be able to respond quickly to it. Some of the statistics that were brought up this morning, and a Pew poll, actually, that I think Stephen Walt mentioned last night, I found to be particularly interesting, but I'll just repeat it. 57% of Americans want the United States to deal with their own problems and let other countries deal with their own problems as best they can. That is a fascinating poll, right? That well over a majority of the country believe that it's possible to do that. And from a national security and foreign policy perspective, I find that just so unrealistic. It's one of these things that when I think about the national security issues that the United States is facing, I think about things like infectious diseases. So, for example, an easily transmissible pathogen that can be caught through respiratory means, even if it only affects 1% of the population that actually gets it, within 6 months will have affected every corner of the world. And that's an extraordinarily timeline that you're on, basically, if you find out that there is such a pathogen that could then become a pandemic in that way.
People believe, this is a man-made, some pharmaceutical company made the virus. So there are some violations and even, death is because of this misinformation. As from like the CDC, and I don't know whether Steve agree with me. When you are doing the field work, and you like to do some so-called TOT, training of trainers. So we really need to train the health workers, especially health care workers, their access to the patients, to the public. So make sure they got the right information. So not necessarily, sometimes the healthcare workers, they know something, but if they are not well trained, they might give the wrong information, but also they might say something, oh, I don't know. Even I don't know, that could hurt. So when I remember that's such a situation reminded me. When I was in Sierra Leone, and I was interviewed by radio, the national radio, I was asked by one of the audience to say, okay, we believe Ebola was man-made. It's transported from, somewhere. So I think this is very important. We do the TOT. So make sure the healthcare workers have the right information.
You just described what your past couple of months has been like.
Yeah, it goes actually back to New Year's Eve. Actually, when I got a call from an old friend, actually originally did his PhD in Oxford, actually, who's now the head of China CDC. And actually, we worked together many years ago on SARS. And you phoned me up on New Year's Eve to say that there was a series of people with a slightly odd lung infection in a city in China, but that they did not think this was the coming back of SARS. And it's really been sort of relentless since then, really. And of course, watching it, spread across China and then, of course, the whole world over the first 100 days is something that people will be talking about for another 100 years. And certainly something that none of us have ever experienced in our lives. So we're going through extraordinary times.
Or not? Mary Jane, the floor is yours.
No, it doesn't matter. Look, I just want to say thank you so much. And what I love to see is that there are, like, we've got Gabriella, who's, I don't know, like about 2.5 or something, and then the rest of us who are, and everyone in between. And everybody's just got such a voice. We've all got our own voice, and we all resonate with different people. So there is no wrong thing to say. I've known about vaccines for 20 years, but come April, I had to make that choice. Do I stick my head above? Like, I'd flown under the radar because I live in Canberra and used to work for the public service. And, this is a heavily MK Ultra town and everybody believes everything the government tells them. And I just said no. And luckily I'm in a position that I could actually, now I'm independent, sold my business last year, quit the public service 10 years ago. So I just went, look, this is my fight. And I think someone else said it, that Autie, was it, said that I just feel that this is what I have been bred to do, is not quite the right terminology. That comes from something else. But all the skills that I've learned along the way have will put me in good stead for this. So my speciality is dumbing things right down to find one thing, and I think someone else mentioned that. Just find one thing.
No, that's a pleasure, Anne, mate. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Over now.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye for now.
But I also think we're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information.
Flood good information. Okay, others, yeah, Jane?
Yeah, so can I agree with that? And my fact, it did come from the Edelman Trust Index, you'll be pleased to know, but also borne out by the work I've done as a CEO in my time. Can I also add that I think there are real technology opportunities here. I personally do not believe that trying to shut things down in terms of information is either practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this. So there is work that's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms. And I know that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this in order that people can just have more confidence in the sources that they will use in any event. So I think both a detailed solution working with individuals, but then also thinking about technology is something we have to advance.
So first I want to ask you for your reactions to these proposals that have been put on the table, and also ask you, do you have some additional action steps that you think could and perhaps should be taken? Yes, please go ahead.
Phone?
There we go.
I agree with all of these. But I think there are other things that can and should be done. If Mike Ryan were here, the gentleman we saw at the outset, he would tell us that the mechanisms to actually do the prevention work, that's very hard to actually get enough funding for that around the world. And if I similarly look, so I chair a body called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. We are investing in the development of vaccines in the neglected and space. For example, MERS vaccines of this kind, the coronavirus. We do not invest enough as a globe in even having the basic options that we could scale up for manufacture. And that's both in the vaccine space, but also in diagnostics, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think putting on this list the financing of both preparedness in a number of countries, but also the technology preparedness, particularly in the vaccines, et cetera, would be a welcome addition.